Welcome to today's FinTech Hot Seat. I'm Craig Jeffery, the Managing Partner of Strategic Treasure. We're an advisory and research firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm delighted to have everyone here to talk about security, and I'll turn it over to let each of the panelists introduce themselves.
Thanks, Craig. My name is Scott Lambert. I'm Managing Director of Treasury for Cigna. So Cigna is a global health service company, 180 million customer and patient relationships in 30 countries. We have about 70,000 employees. Our 2019 revenue was approximately $153 billion. My responsibilities are treasury operations. So I have about 44 employees located throughout the United States, and I have 2 employees located in Hong Kong.
Yeah, my name is Mohammed Al-Zraiqat. I'm working with Bottomline Technology as a senior financial crime and fraud manager. So my responsibility is about the understanding the market conditions and listening to customers and trying to come up with a solution that tailors and try to prevent fraud and financial crimes. So Bottomline is a publicly held company, and we basically provide services and on payments and also technology on the fighting financial crimes and complying with local and international regulations. We basically help people pay and get paid. So that's basically what Bottomline is all about.
Hi, I'm Chris Gerda, and I lead the risk and fraud prevention efforts for Bottomline's PayModeX line of business, which is a 485,000 network member strong, processing $285 billion or so annually to vendors in an authenticated payment network to prevent against fraud.
Great. Scott, Mohammed, Chris, thank you for your introductions, and I'll introduce you to our moderator today, Doug Hartsema. Doug, maybe you just fill in a little bit more, and we'll get going.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm Doug Hartsema. I'm the managing partner of the Hartsema Group. We're a small, specialized consulting practice that runs customer advisory groups, primarily in the banking and treasury space. So let's get started. A quick overview of what we're going to cover today. First of all, we're going to do an inventory of the concerns around cybersecurity and fraud and payment risk, payment fraud. Then we're going to talk about business email compromise, particularly around the crisis, account takeover fraud, system penetration, sort of your worst nightmare. We want to talk about attack vendors, the bad guys, and then finally a vaccine for cyber fraud. We're going to ask the question, is this ever going to be easy? So let's start with the concerns inventory. Everybody watching this event has a list of concerns on the topic of fraud and cybersecurity. There's certain things you're worried about, but the folks that we have on this panel are experts. So given your expertise and your daily interaction in this space, your list might be slightly different from those that are watching this presentation. So let's start with the 1 or 2 of the top concerns that you see in this space. And we're going to talk to the technicians and the practitioners. So in this case, let's start with the practitioners. So now let's do that. Let's start with the technicians here. Let's start with Chris.
Sure, thanks, Doug. And I appreciate being here and going through some of these tactics, especially in this COVID environment. So I think the top 3 for me, one would definitely be account takeovers, which we're going to get to. Those are really precipitated by the increased phishing attempts that are out there and why those attempts are successful. The second would be, and I think it's significant, is ransomware due to the ability to deliver malware more effectively because the numbers game now has this new excuse of COVID-19 to get people to click, download, and to pressure them into opening new attachments. Those are probably 2 of the most damaging ones and the ones that become harder when you're in a work from home environment and you can't do callbacks the same way you usually would.
Craig, let's go to you next, the customer view on this.
I look at, because we work with a lot of customers, a lot of companies, and I guess one of the things I would say related to our research is because these threats are sophisticated, the criminals are both persistent and automated, the attack levels escalate. And Chris mentioned a couple great examples of why there's an increased level of concern. And so I'm taking a broader approach and saying, because the threat is escalating so dramatically, and people are spending more to provide a defense, my bigger concern is that the level of confidence people have with what they've done last year or 2 years ago is making too many people complacent. They think they have things lined up. So I think the concern is really around the element of making sure your defenses continue to increase to exceed the increase in the attack level. And I'll leave it at that. Chris laid out a couple really key attack types that are a concern too.
Okay, again, changing gears. Mohammed from Bottomline.
Yeah, so one of the really biggest challenge that we are seeing in the industry and speaking to customers and even with the regulators as well is the authorized push payments fraud. So this is really significantly over the last couple of years, and 2020 with everyone working from home is really not an exception. And what's very interesting about this type of fraud is you as a person, you authorize your financial institution or corporate to make the payment yourself. So the challenge here is it is very hard for institutions to know if it is intentional by being complicit to the fraud or being really a subject or a victim for a fraud. So this is really something that makes it challenging for institution to figure out what was the real reason behind it. So authorized push payment, and there's a huge increase even in Europe in general about the whole crime. So this is really one of the biggest challenges I can see in the industry.
Let's wrap up with Scott from Cigna.
Yeah, I would say that my two largest concerns at the moment are it's still business email compromise, and specifically vendors or healthcare providers that we deal with that their email has been compromised, and we've seen a number of attempts where fraudsters have actually hacked into a vendor's email system and try to change instructions. We see quite a bit of that, and even more during COVID. And then the other one on my list is it's account takeover, similar to Chris. Not only is it a concern for the Cigna accounts, but also for the client accounts that we manage, whether it be kind of our administrative services business or kind of the health savings accounts that many of our customers have.
Quick follow-up for anyone. Do you think your list of top concerns is going to be different, say, a year, 2, 3 years from now?
As I mentioned, we noticed there is an increase over the last couple of years in the authorized push payments, and the UK Finance, which is an association here based in the UK, responsible for providing some services on the financial sector. They provided actually a staggering number. There is a 29% increase from 2018 over 2019. And talking to customers, understanding the data that we have about customers, how they are using our fraud detection systems and stuff, we realized there's a huge significance of people working from home that led to people seeing these numbers increase. So I don't see for the upcoming at least couple of years any decrease of the authorized push payments, given the fact people want to have transactions processed faster, and also the speedity, and also the anonymous concept of the fraudsters behind it. So I still believe there will be an increase over the coming years in the authorized push payments as well.
Doug, I would jump in too and say that as we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, there's new combinations of attack methods where business email compromise, for example, is combined with data exfiltration, increasing their yield by about 11-fold for financial returns. We expect to see more combinations of that, and just like we also saw earlier, where phishing emails were written so horribly, everyone kind of laughed at them, and then they've been able to escalate what's going on. We expect increased sophistication across all areas, which necessarily means something's going to change with that. The one thing we see happening is, I expect to see some improvements, and I don't want to give too many clues to those who are criminals who are trying to take advantage of different payment systems or attack methods, is they don't always understand how the payment systems work very well. They continue to find out more. each month, each quarter, but sometimes they've made some very, what we would consider foolish mistakes, but they're learning and fixing those. So I think there's going to be bigger issues in payment systems. I don't want to be more specific about that, but I think we could all relate to some examples where they were caught by luck, by not knowing a piece of information.
I think that's a great point, Craig. The criminals are always going to gravitate to the weakest link in the chain of technology or the policies within an individual organization that they're targeting. So when you look at in the recent 2-year fold, they started finding that two-factor authentication was the blockade of stopping them and to getting into account takeover. And so they moved to, how can I take over two-factor authentication? And now SIM port fraud has become a much more prevalent fraud tactic so that they could get that big payday. So how do we stop SIM port fraud, and what's the next step there? And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in account takeover in upcoming questions. But always being, what is the weakest link? The scheme doesn't really change. The overall business email account compromise, account takeover, those remain the top concerns, I think, for me in the next 2 years. But the tactic by which they perpetrate those frauds changes.
And Chris, maybe just to add on to that, to your point, the fraudster is always looking for the weakest link. I think it's important for companies to understand what their potential vulnerabilities are. And to your point, I think a lot of companies have really spent a lot of time building up their defenses around business email compromise, looking at account takeover. And I guess what concerns me is what's next. What's out there that I don't know about now that I might have to worry about 2 years from now.
Let's dig a little deeper into the business email compromise and how that's changed. One of my favorite quotes is "Never waste a good crisis." And it wasn't, that quote didn't come from a criminal, at least not that I know of. But unfortunately, the criminals really are trying to capitalize on this current crisis. So specific to business email compromise, what are you seeing that wasn't happening pre-crisis? And let's start with the technologists this time. Let's do Chris and Mohammed, and then the practitioner view from Craig and Scott. So Chris.
Largely, the business email account compromise scam has remained the same. It's the social engineering angle that changes. So fraudsters are using COVID-19 and the empathy that everyone has for one another as their ability to put pressure on organizations they're targeting to not do a callback because they're not at their desk because they're working from home. So they've been able to not only do that, but they've actually been able to deliver more successful phishing emails. One of the most successful ones was the John Hopkins COVID-19 heat map. So people, when they're under pressure, they want knowledge, and COVID-19 is putting that on us. And so fraudsters are sending links out that are the best clickbait they could possibly have because of the pandemic. And that gives people the click, and then they're going to give up their Microsoft credentials to their Outlook to access said document. And then all of a sudden they're phished, and the fraudster can enter into their email. So COVID-19, in short, has been the social engineering hotbed that has been the difference in how BEC scams are being conducted right now.
Here at Bottomline, for example, we have almost about 3,000 customers, primarily corporates, using our fraud detection systems that we provide. And we clearly notice from the data that we have and the statistics, there is a huge rise in the cases that's flagged as unusual for our customers, basically, to look into this and review these kind of type of activities. And this, in my opinion, really ties to two aspects, mainly because from technology standpoint, the technology that relies really heavily on how the customers, ultimate customers, are spending behavior is, and how they are using their payment or financial systems into this, slightly changed during the pandemic. usually you spend normally before that, then you suddenly start to spend and your spending behavior has changed. And that naturally leads to a system to digest this information and because it's based on the profile, there will be change in the custom profile, and the system will need some time to adjust and quickly try to adjust to that kind of change and shift to that. This comes off obviously with some sort of high level of false positive rates, and as a result of that, and this is naturally because systems are relying on the behavior profiling of customers, and if there is any deviation of that, this will be flagged. The second aspect of it is basically customers start to use more of the remote payment channels such as cards or online payments, faster payments, and they rely on the information that they receive from their customers. And if this information has been compromised, like for example, if you take the CEO fraud type, and that's basically you pretend that you are the person who is behind the email, but it turned out not to be. And unfortunately, it opens the door so wide for fraudster and to thrive, and also to use that as a vulnerability for some victims due to the lack of their awareness or maybe knowledge. And that really causes some losses for customers, victims, and also financial institutions as well.
Let's transition to the customer piece. Scott and then Craig.
Yeah, so from a business email compromise perspective, we're not seeing as much, I'll call it the emails from the kind of the fraudulent emails, apparently from an executive asking to transfer money associated with a big deal that's top secret. We saw a number of those a couple of years back, but I think companies have done a pretty good job in the fact that when emails are received by the company, you can usually tell if it comes from the outside or not. We've done enough training internally to tell all our employees that they won't receive emails from an executive asking them to transfer money, and we're pretty good about doing like mandatory training every year. And Treasury also we take a lead and also help our business partners with fraud training. What we are seeing an increase, though, is on emails from vendors or healthcare providers asking to change banking instructions. And, in the past, we were always trained to kind of look for anomalies within the email address that it's not quite from the vendor. It sort of looks like it comes from the vendor, but there might be some slight difference in the email address from where you're receiving the email that would tell you that it's not from them. But what we are seeing more of is that the vendors' email systems are being hacked, and it really is coming from the vendor's email system, and it is a legitimate email address, and those are the ones that are a little scarier. But we have certainly implemented fraud control prevention practices within the company that we're not going to act on an email alone. We're going to call back somebody within the company, a known relationship contact, and the other thing that we've been doing too is we've been implementing account validation software too, where we could type in an account number and an account name, and we'll get feedback fairly immediately as to whether there's a match or not. So those are a few of the things that we're working on.
Following on some of the discussion that what's effective with the lie. I guess part of the lie of a business email compromise is if you seed in more truth that exists there. And so, some of the examples are, someone receives an email, it says our main headquarter offices are closed, everyone's working from home, we need to change payment instructions so they can be received and seen by the factory, here's the information. So you're like, oh, the fact, headquarters is closed, finance is closed, they're working from home, so there's a number of things that march you in that direction. And so, in addition to the clickbait, like Chris had mentioned, there's this more believable storyline that you're like nodding your head 3 times, and then the fourth one is where it's shifted.
Let's go into account takeover fraud, the second most popular concern. Obviously, there's a risk in today's environment. On this topic, though, rather than what's happening out there, I want to shift the question away from what's happening to what can we do about it. So what can we actually do about account takeover fraud? And again, I want to start with the technologists. So how about Mohammed first, then Chris?
Yeah, I mean, one of the greatest examples I always refer to is what the UK has came up with the initiative, which is the confirmation of payee. This is really a good example of how you can eliminate at least as much as possible of this. So, as I mentioned earlier about the significant increase in the authorized push payments, it's really reaching about in 2019 about equivalent to the $600 million last year of the fraud subject related money that has been basically subject for this type of fraud. This is significant. So UK financial regulators mandated the largest 6 banks in the UK to come up with a significant or a specific initiative to help minimize this type of fraud. And basically, and it's really depends on the sharing of the information between these financial institutions. And that ties up to the share of liability with the end customers as well, make the customers also liable of this kind of fraud as well as the financial institution. So this is also, on the other hand, also increases the customer experience. If you give the customer the option to make sure that they know where the payment is going to, this is a significant increase in the satisfaction. So the confirmation of payee is basically is live now in the UK, and somewhat with the data sharing, as I mentioned, it's basically a name matching service. If you think about this, in which you set when you set up a new payee, you have to make sure this is the account number, this is a sort code which you use here specifically, and also it matches the name on the account within the institution. This is significant because it makes sure that the payment is going to the ultimate person, that you know this person is behind it. And whatever this account take over or even authorized payment, you make sure the payment is going to the right people. One good example is Lloyds Bank basically shared statistics. After they participating in the confirmation of payee protocol here, they had shared, actually they got 31% reduction in the authorized push payments fraud that they currently have. This is a huge, significant amount of saving for the financial institution, and also remove a lot of burden from the ultimate end customers.
Chris, anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So confirmation of payee, we have similar type of services in the United States that financial institutions utilize. It's not stemming from the regulatory body where it does in the United Kingdom. But I see that as falling kind of in the middle of a defense strategy to prevent this. The first thing to prevent account takeover is to enable two-factor authentication on everything you have. Email, your computers at home, your bank accounts, and if you have the ability to use an authenticator app, use that over a text message because it's more secure. And also, I talked about SIM port fraud earlier. Make sure that your cell phone account has a PIN number that a fraudster would need to have in order to move your SIM card, which is essentially your cell phone number, to another phone, so that you have another blockade for them. And that kind of controls the moat around the castle. And that comes before you even have to worry about authenticating an account. Those are extremely important. And do it both on your personal and your business life. Because as we've seen, they've just collided. And we have to make sure that everything we have is secure to make our company secure. And then I also see after that payee confirmation, bank validation type of process, we see a lot of people moving larger corporates to in-house payment monitoring, not relying on the banks as much to detect a fraudulent payment, but actually taking control themselves because they know their business better than anyone else. So what keeps strategic leaders up at night is payments to new payees that didn't actually maybe follow the validation process as well as they needed it to be done. And they can put flags and interdict payments before they even go to the bank for processing, so they can have a level of oversight. In today's environment, you have to assume you're going to be breached, and figuring out how to block those things proactively rather than reactively is really the method you want to take.
Perfect segue into my next question for Scott and Craig. So for you guys, the question is slightly different. Fraud detection prevention requires a partnership with the banks, your technology providers, their technology providers, and their customers. So from your perspective, what's the current state of that fraud partnership and what could be done to improve it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. How are the three elements working together? I'll give some examples that might be the best way to look at it. So some technology firms offer a range of additional services. Same thing with banks. They offer validation, confirmation, checking, and they're, it always seems to some people that they're offering these items for sale, for profit, and their attitude sometimes has been, why are they trying to make a profit on all this? Aren't they liable as it is? And I think banks have gotten a lot better about educating what's going on, and they're really trying to protect their clients. And they're trying to protect them with these services, but they're also doing quite a bit in the education front. So whether it's providing training to their corporate clients, firms like Bottomline or banks are offering different types of training or courses or seminars to make sure people can detect those. And that's really a key part of this idea of a partnership where they're sharing what they know. Banks, technology firms, payment providers like Bottomline are ones that can easily share the knowledge of dozens and hundreds of customers and share that to companies who may experience a few things or have a small network that they're gaining information. So I think the knowledge is a real key element of the partnership, knowledge sharing and training.
Yeah, and Craig, I'll add on to that. So we work very closely with our banks and our technology partners to kind of get a better understanding of, here's what we have in place, what could we be doing better? And kind of having that collaboration, I think, is very important. To Chris's point, we ensure that all of our payment platforms do have multi-factor authentication. And for our SaaS platforms, we even go a step further. So not only does it have multi-factor authentication, but we also work with the vendor to have IP address restrictions. So if a transaction is initiated and it doesn't come from the specific IP address, then we have certain restrictions around it. And plus, you can't even get into our system if it doesn't come from that particular IP address. Other things that we're doing with our banking partners and technology vendors, I know that there was discussion around account validation. We're starting to, we're using that more and more. I will say it's not a perfect solution, so it's only as good as the information that the banks contribute into that very large database. And we're still finding that a number of our global banks, I think, are fairly represented within the database, but a lot of the smaller banks and credit unions are potentially contributing information into that account validation database. So it's only as good as the information that's there, but it is getting better. The other thing some of our banks are doing now is they've put artificial intelligence around their payments databases. So we noticed that a few of our large disbursement banks are contacting us now saying, hey, we've noticed that this is the first time you made a payment to this payee. Is it valid or not? And initially it was kind of driving me crazy doing all these acknowledgments, but I've grown to really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I cannot, if I may add also, I cannot really agree more on the training and raising awareness to the customers and the ultimate users actually of the system. So bottom line, what we use actually, we set up some what we call advisory board in which we actually sit with each customers across the regions, and we designated different teams across different regions because they know exactly what the market conditions are, what kind of type of frauds that are increasing in a specific region. And this advisory board role basically is sitting with the customers, try to help them, try to fine-tune the system that works the best for them, and try to make sure that they get the value out of the systems, increasing the awareness as well, and making sure that everyone is aware of what the current challenge is. So this is really something that ties into the partnership between the two parties.
Let's transition to system penetration. Has to be the nightmare scenario for all of us. But of course we know that system penetration only happens in another country with someone else's customers or another company, right? Can't happen to us. Today's audience are primarily bankers and corporate practitioners, probably about half and half. So what advice do you have to bankers and or corporate practitioners about how to address and or prevent this nightmare scenario of a full-on system penetration? Again, let's start with the technologist. Let's go Chris first.
If I think system penetration, I'm gonna take the example of ransomware. It's the one we hear the most often. It shuts down and lately has been just snarling hospitals to a halt. Or if you're central corporate to business and you need to maintain your operations, the first thing I'd recommend is get cozy with your IT department as a business leader. Understand how your data is encrypted. Is it encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted at transit? Have a flow chart, understand where your weak links are, and make a plan to always be moving forward and closing any loopholes that you see, and be really blunt about it. And don't kind of beat around the bush, so to speak, about the possibility of something happening. And with that, establish that incident response plan. It doesn't have to be a book, and it shouldn't be something that's too stringent to follow. It needs to be flexible and give you an ability to work within some sort of common framework, so when something happens, you're not scrambling right off the bat. And then finally, partner with, if you're large enough, your third-party firms that you may use. You may already be looking at them to come in, and if there's a cyber incident, how will they help you? Or proactively speak with them about how those services work, so that maybe they're slightly familiar with your systems already. They know you. Maybe you have an arrangement with them set up. So when something happens, the people that are coming in to set you back up, to get you running and get your customers back online, know you and know your systems to some extent.
Yeah, when you think about all of the data that Chris mentioned, really there's a huge amount of data that lies within the firewall and the IT department. So this is data that comes in and out and being monitored and trafficked. If you apply some sort of analytics of how usually your data traffic looks like, and if there is any deviation or any increase or any anomalies in these kind of traffic, you can basically use what you call record and play and analyze anything that's suspicious enough for this traffic data that comes in. A huge amount of data. Every department has their own IT department, which all this traffic comes into through the network. And it's very important to build some sort of analytics of how usually it looks like. Even during the peak time, during the ease time, you can analyze this and build a profile even on the network itself, as much as you are building profiles over customers' behavior and spending behavior, stuff like that. And regardless of it's financial institution or corporate, it is really, there is a treasure there in which you can build up analytics and try to profile the network flow and the traffic and build any anomalies that could really stem out of this from practicality standpoint.
Great, thanks, Mohammed. So from a corporate standpoint, system penetration, Scott?
Yeah, and it's certainly not my my area of expertise, but I do have meetings and I do meet periodically with our data security team, and I know that we have a large group that's continually monitoring our networks for data intrusion. I know that they utilize third-party companies that attempt to hack into our network and have groups that kind of monitor, and they do these red team, blue team exercises also continually throughout the year, and are always evaluating potential vulnerabilities to our networks, et cetera. I will say that training is also key. We go through training every year to train all of our employees not to click on any links that are sent in emails, and we actually do phishing training exercises where an email will be sent to an individual. And if you click on the link, it says, "Okay, you failed," and if you fail a couple times, you have to go through training again, and that's done throughout our company as well. And then kind of getting back to multi-factor authentication. I know Chris had brought that up earlier, but having multi-factor authentication on all of our treasury systems has been important for us as well.
Scott, great points, and Mohammed, I love some of the things that you were saying. I think one of the elements of advice that you're asking for, Doug, one is on perspective, and the other will be just more tactical pieces of advice. I think the perspective is the difference between being paranoid about defense and being derelict in your duties can be 2 months to 2 years. So what's considered, that's way overkill today, may not even be enough in a few years. And that's just the general issue of what's taking place. And so Mohammed's points about using technology to find and detect problems, I think is brilliant, because to defeat the automated, sophisticated hackers that are using technology tools, we need tools in our defense. That's probably the only way that can occur. Scott mentioned training. That's a good point. Training with testing is vital. A couple other ways of protecting against this, I think, is this idea of vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. Those seem like those are check the box. We've already done those, and we work with large companies, small companies. Our company is under 50 people. And the amount of attacks and attempts that we get is, it seems unbelievable to me, despite the fact that we do surveys and see how persistent, prevalent, and automated these types of attacks are. Any given day, we were realizing, 750 to 1,100 attack attempts, and we had to outsource some of the defense just because the number of attacks and attempts was outrageous. I can only imagine what's going on at Cigna and other companies if we're experiencing that. And so we've had to leverage outsourcing tools and techniques, and we run vulnerability scans constantly that requires immediate fixing. And then we have the red and blue team of you pay people to try to break into your system. You share more information than you share in the web so that they have the ability to probe your system. I think that's true. The technology pros need to know that, but also treasury and payables professionals, we need to know how do you make sure you're attuned to that. And this other last concept is, how are you benchmarking yourself against practices that others are doing? Where do you fall in there? And then what should you be doing from what your technologists, your bankers, and the industry is saying?
Let's change the subject a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the crooks themselves, what we're calling attack vectors. Another of my favorite quotes: if you want to understand a frog, don't study the frog, study the pond. So how much do we know about these criminals, and what's really their motivation, and what does their playbook look like? In short, what does their pond look like? So let's again start with the technologists. Mohammed this time. What do we know about these crooks?
Yeah, and in general, throughout my career, when I was I'm still in the financial crime and fraud detection technology as a practitioner, we always used to know, and this is a fact, that always criminals are one step ahead of us. They will absolutely find ways to find venues, how to defraud the public. And they are just like, one of the examples I can say, just like the water, they run through the streams with its least resistance. So the more we have any vulnerability, they absolutely will latch on it and will absolutely take advantage of it. So what that is, understanding the pond is really just like understanding the ecosystem we are operating within, and make sure that we set the right controls and we mitigate as much as problem as we can. Think about the whole COVID thing. Nobody knows that's going to happen. When it happens, they found an opportunity for it because they will take a step forward, a step ahead of us. What we try to do actually, as a practitioner or even as a technologist, we try to mitigate as much as possible to stop that from bleeding. And we build the profiles, we build the controls and risk management to mitigate that from happening again. But I can tell, the way I understood it throughout the career, it's always hard for us to be ahead of the curve. We just try to minimize as much as possible and learn from what we have as we learn typologies, we learn trends, and this ties up to the whole ecosystem and how we can understand any vulnerabilities within the ecosystem.
I think that you'll find most of the criminals today are definitely within organizations, organized crime, international, overseas. They want to remain anonymous, but they need to have a touch point where they can actually receive funds, either through a mule account or a Smurf account, and they're trying to hide. So looking for the things that, if they're swimming in the pond and they're hunting, they're using proxy IP addresses to mask their location, and we can see that. And when in business, it's very odd to use a proxy of a certain type, so you can stay out ahead of them. I think too, they're playing a numbers game. So they're swimming through, and eventually they're going to find someone that is going to fall victim, whether that is an elder financial exploitation situation or a loophole in the email security at a corporate. And they can do that because of, as Craig often puts it, the automation of their attacks can be widespread. And then as soon as they have a fish on, and so to speak, with the pond analogy, that's where they start targeting and focusing.
Craig or Scott, any insights on what corporates know about the crooks?
I guess I'll just add on to what the Bottomline team had said, is that I quite honestly, I really didn't know much about the profile of crooks until I started having conversations with our data privacy, data security team. And I think somebody from the Bottomline team had previously brought up incident response, and we do that within Cigna, between our data security, our IT group, and our businesses. And we go through various scenarios. I mean, thankfully it hasn't happened, but we do scenario planning. And one of the scenarios was around ransomware. So if we get hit with a ransomware attack, what do? Do we pay the ransom? And being a finance guy, my first question is, well, if you pay it, how do you know you're going to get your data back? And our data security guy said, well, these crooks have a reputation to uphold, right? So if they don't give you your data back and they implement ransomware somewhere else, that people are going to be less apt to pay it. So they almost have a brand, which is a little scary. And that's when it really hit home for me that this really is a business, and it's not some high school kid sitting in his parents' basement trying to hack into a corporation.
Yeah, I like that. There's no honor among thieves, right? They have a brand to protect, and yet some of those ransomware payoffs, they end up not being able to unencrypt them. It's not a huge percentage, but sometimes that's happening. But I think some of the other elements of the attack vectors that come in and perspectives on the pond, if you will, is that they're playing the long game. Their payoffs are huge, and so they're much more patient than the check fraud criminals of the past, right? It was much easier to do it, and you get $1,500, $1,800, and you move on to the next one. All you have to do is buy checks and do that. Well, the payoffs are 10, 100, 1,000-fold, multiple orders of magnitude higher. They can stay and wait, and nation-state actors are doing these things as well. So this long game is important. They can invest more, so their tech is more sophisticated. They're also leveraging what's going on in the business, not only leveraging tech, but they're leveraging multi-level marketing, if you will. Ransomware as a service is an example where they put tools out, and then someone else who's an expert at writing good emails or crafting things for clickbait can then leverage those tools to attack what's going on. So they're trying to steal data, convince you to send money, get you to send money, or lock up your data. And then they're also trying to increase the sense of urgency if they've compromised any element. And I think the last piece that may not make as much sense to finance people who, if they're not into the tech of fraud, is this idea of they're trying to penetrate and remove any layer that you have. And once they penetrate a layer, compromise a layer, they will use that to either move laterally or to find the next layers. They'll just keep working and remove. You have 4 layers? Okay, I've got your multi-factor compromise. Now you haven't made a change at the bank system, so I'm going to start up a conversation with the next layer of your security. So they're sophisticated, they're persistent, and they'll learn piece by piece to wear you down. Not unlike the Borg, if you're a sci-fi fan. They're just going to continue to compromise the next system. So we have to have a defense that matches and cycles accordingly.
Yeah, just the last thought about this is they also leverage the same technology that we also use to prevent the same crime that they commit. So it's very interesting to see that we both from the both spectrums, we're fighting over the same thing to prevent what they're doing. And I mean, they also gather the same way we do here, try to prevent. They gather using the dark web or somewhere. They chat, they figure out what ways how to basically penetrate the systems and stuff.
Okay, the final topic I'm going to call coasting. So surely somewhere there's a vaccine out there for all of this. And so surely one day this entire issue is just going to be something that the IT department takes care of, right? So, but seriously, will there ever be a time when we can just kind of coast on this topic?
I don't think that will ever be the case. I mean, I think there's too much money out there to be made, unfortunately. And, I think what you have for defense today, what's considered state of the art today, might not even meet minimal viable requirements, even a couple of years from now. So I think it's important that you understand what your potential vulnerabilities are. I think Chris brought up earlier that the fraudsters are always looking for the weakest link. So understand what your vulnerabilities are and have a plan to address them. Continually work with your technologists and your banks to understand what the latest fraud out there is and what training's available that you should be providing to your staff, and then you kind of work with your internal IT team to ensure that you're addressing any potential concerns.
Okay, all right, Craig, are we ever going to coast on this?
I think the answer is a big no, but and I would phrase it this way too. I was thinking about this because you gave us a little bit of heads up on what you would ask about, and I think of it's like the question about will we have peace? And there was I don't know if it was a Twilight Zone where someone found a genie bottle, rubbed it, and his first wish was world peace, and everybody was gone, and he was the only person there. And so obviously I had to use a second wish to bring people back. But the point there is, as long as we have people and money, we're going to have a problem, and it's not going to go away. As long as those two things exist.
I totally agree with the concept. I cannot see this is going to cost, at least for the time being, or at least for the foreseeable future, as I can see. I don't know what's in 5-10 years, what could happen. But at the time, I don't see that is going to go away. But we think about I encourage the IT department team, as well as risk managers or treasurer or account payables, or all the fraud prevention and cyber attack specialists. Just try not to tune your risk appetite or minimize your risk controls to compromise the higher volume of workload that you might get because of what will cause this to happen. For example, if you increase your system threshold, might expose you to become a victim. So this is really something quite important for everyone to understand. And leveraging the technology, in my opinion, the technology is here to help. And think about also the automation of the process. If you have a lot of repetitive work that you have to do in order to help preventing those kind of attacks, use those technologies. Think about the robotic process automation is there to help. Ask your provider, ask your partner or vendor of what is it that you can do. Maybe both together you can leverage some areas in which you can enhance more on your controls instead of just minimizing it for the sake of minimizing the fraud or the cyber attacks.
Okay, Chris, please tell me that these guys are wrong and this isn't going to be a problem.
Well, I think we have to maintain security. To maintain security, you have to maintain your strength, and to do that, you need discipline. And every day, you have to put calluses on your hands. You can get into a good culture that is not afraid of doing that every day. And that's the only way you can feel like you're coasting. But you're coasting ahead of the fraud. You're never going to coast behind the fraud, because you're either ahead or behind it. So you can coast, but you can coast by doing the hard work and feel good about the culture that you're in. And culture is very important. And to Mohammed's point about workflow and workload, you have to absolutely be ready to take that on. And you can do that in a good culture. And you can do that with good technology partners that can bring the ease that allows you to scale your business. So I think that puts it all together. If you're gonna coast ahead with hard work. That'll help you sleep at night, but there's no actual coasting going on here.
I love it. That's a perfect close. So let me thank the participants. Thoroughly enjoyed the discussion today. I will turn it over to Craig to close us out.
Thanks, Doug. Great job moderating. This is our first remote FinTech hot seat due to COVID. You did a fantastic job. Really appreciated the dialogue and just the learning that went on. Mohammed and Chris and Scott, thank you so much for participating. Just, fraud and protecting against fraud is such a core responsibility. We're very thankful for each of you for sharing this information. And for those watching, thanks for joining us.